So today, we are going to dig into a book that basically wants to flip everything we think we know about one of the world's most difficult conflicts. It's called The Wrong Villain, and its whole point is that for the last, 75 plus years, the West has been reading the situation completely wrong. And it kicks off with a question that, honestly, is the elephant in the room. Why? Why, after all this time, after all the handshakes and summits and peace plans, why has every single one failed? The book's answer is that maybe, just maybe, we've been asking the wrong questions the entire time.
And boom, here it is. This is the core argument of the book, right on this slide. It suggests the West is stuck on a political question. What did Israel do? But the source argues that's not the real question. The real question, it says, is theological. It's not about borders or settlements, but about a fundamental principle in Islamic law.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the history of the Jewish people returning. Then we'll get into that doctrinal rejection the book talks about. After that, we'll see how the West supposedly got it all wrong, and we'll finish up by looking at what modern data says about this so-called theological wall.
All right, first up, a people coming home. The whole point of this section is to pull the lens back, way back, beyond the 20th century. The book wants to frame this not as a modern political project, but as the final chapter of an indigenous return story that's been 2,000 years in the making.
And this wasn't some vague, forgotten idea. For 2 millennia, the book argues, this return was literally baked into the daily, weekly, and yearly life of Jewish people everywhere. It's in the Passover meal. It's in the daily prayers. It's even at weddings. And this is a key point. There was always a Jewish presence there. It wasn't a return to an empty land. It was a return to a homeland that, for some, was never abandoned. I mean, just think about this. This one line has been recited for 2,500 years. It's not a political slogan invented in the 1900s. The book presents this as part of a deep, spiritual, and national DNA, one of the oldest, most unbroken connections between a people and a place in all of human history.
So how did this ancient dream become a modern reality? Well, this is where the book really pushes back hard against the popular narrative of a colonial conquest. It argues that the method was the exact opposite of conquest. It was explicitly legal, financial, and diplomatic.
And this slide just lays out that process perfectly. It started with buying land, legally, from willing sellers. Then came international recognition, first from Britain, then the whole League of Nations. But look at that last step. That's the crucial one. When the UN offered a two-state solution, the Jewish leadership said yes. The Arab leadership said no. The book points to this moment as the real beginning of the conflict we know today.
Now, check out these numbers because they tell a really interesting story that you might not have heard. The book uses this data to challenge the idea of displacement before 1948. Yeah, the Jewish population exploded, but look at the Arab population. It tripled. The source argues that this happened because Jewish immigration brought economic development that benefited everyone, leading to parallel growth, not one group replacing the other. And that rejection of the UN partition plan, that's what leads us right into the book's central, most provocative argument, that the hostility wasn't a political reaction to a new state. It was something deeper, something older. It was, according to this book, a doctrinal rejection. Okay, so the first big idea we need to get our heads around is this concept. Dar al-Islam, or the domain of Islam. According to the classical Islamic law presented in the book, any land that has ever been under Muslim rule belongs to Islam. The idea of it being permanently governed by non-Muslims is seen as a fundamental violation, an unacceptable reversal of the proper order of the world. And then, building right on top of that, you have this idea of waqf. This makes that land not just politically claimed, but a sacred divine trust, held on behalf of all Muslims, forever. From this viewpoint, no king, president, or prime minister has the right to sell it or sign it away in a peace treaty. It's simply not theirs to give. And look, the book is saying this isn't just some dusty, ancient theory. It points to real people saying real things. This is the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem back in 1929. Notice the language. Desecrate, filthy feet. This is religious language, not political. And what's the most important part? This was said 19 years before Israel even existed. The hostility, the book argues, was already there. And the Hebron massacre is presented as the tragic proof. This wasn't a battle. It was an attack on a centuries-old, unarmed Jewish community. And just look at the dates. 19 years before the State of Israel, 38 years before the occupation of the West Bank. The book's point is that the violence can't be a reaction to things that haven't even happened yet. The cause had to be something else. So if the root of the conflict is, as the source argues, theological, then how on earth did the entire Western world come to see it as a political squabble over land and borders? Well, this next section is all about that, how theology got lost in translation and replaced by politics. Okay, this slide is basically a decoder ring for the entire conflict, according to this book. It argues that there's a public language using terms the West understands, like occupation or resistance, but underneath, these words are just placeholders for much deeper theological concepts. So occupation isn't just about soldiers, it's a violation of Dar el-Islam. Resistance isn't just political, it's a religious duty to reclaim the Waqf.
Let's take a slogan we hear all the time: Free Palestine. Now, in the West, the book says most people hear that and think of a two-state solution, a Palestinian state living peacefully next to Israel. But the source insists that in its original context, from the river to the sea has always meant one thing: the complete removal of the state of Israel. It's a massive disconnect, not just in words, but in the ultimate goal.
All right, so does any of this historical, theological framework actually matter today? I mean, that was all a long time ago, right? Well, the book's final section argues that if you look at the data, this theological wall is not only still standing, it's as high as ever.
Just look at this. The numbers here are, frankly, staggering. In places like Egypt and Jordan, countries that have had official peace treaties with Israel for decades, over 90% of the population still opposes Israel's fundamental right to exist. The book's takeaway is that a peace treaty between governments has done almost nothing to change the core belief on the street.
And if you think, okay, but what about the new modernizing Arab states? Well, this slide is a real showstopper. The book cites a recent poll finding that in Saudi Arabia, despite all the government's efforts to open up, a staggering 99% of people saw normalizing relations with Israel as a bad thing. The argument is clear: modernization is not erasing this core conviction.
So you might be asking, well, what about all the peace talks? What were the Oslo Accords? The book has a specific answer for that, and it's this concept of a hudna. It's not sul, which means real, permanent peace. A hudna is a temporary truce. It's a theologically approved way to hit pause when you're weak, regroup, and wait for a better time to resume the struggle. You never actually accept the other side's right to be there.
So, to wrap the entire thesis up in a nutshell, the book argues this was never a standard political conflict. It's not about two sides who just can't agree on a border. According to The Wrong Villain, it's a fundamental, head-on collision between a people's ancient return to their homeland and a powerful religious doctrine that says that return is illegitimate and must, one day, be reversed.
And that leaves us with the book's final, and let's be honest, pretty chilling question. If the problem isn't actually political, if it's theological, then are the tools we've been using for 75 years, diplomacy, negotiations, land for peace, even the right tools for the job? It's a question that challenges everything and suggests that maybe we've been trying to solve the wrong problem all along.